Thank you very much for coming today. It's a huge pleasure to welcome Carole Berrih from the University of Grenoble Alpes, although I don't know how much time she can spend in Grenoble because she's constantly researching prisons around the world. I mean, principally in Africa, but in many other places too, and is currently, I believe, in Japan, which is the main reason why we're holding this session earlier than our usual time. Anyway, Carole has a massive prior experience inquiring into prisons, both in the NGO world and in academia. As I said, mainly, but not by no means exclusively in Africa. And today's topic is about prisons in Niger and techniques of order maintenance and domination there. I'm really, really looking forward to finding out something about that. What we usually do, Carole, is we ask you to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we have another 30 minutes for discussion. So welcome, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very honored to be presenting my research. So I'll share my screen if it's okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. So the presentation the presentation I'm gonna make today is actually based on my PhD thesis that was published last December, and on an article that I wrote in French that was published in 2023. So it's about the prisons of Niger, and more specifically about how states govern institutions where they seem to be absent from them, and how they use the people they are supposed to control to extend their own power. So I'll start with a quote from one of the member of the Niger National Guard. So he told me, even if you have 2,000 guards, if you don't have intelligence from the detainee, it's useless. And that sentence really captures everything that I would like to talk to you about today. So before getting into the specifics of Niger, I'll briefly situate this work in the existing literature on prison in Africa. So over the past decade or so, there had been a very strong increase of research on African prison, looking at what scholars call the everyday governance, which has considerably opened a new way of studying prisons in Africa. So this work has shown that in many African prisons, some detainees play a central role in managing daily life, allocating sleeping spaces, organizing food distribution, settling disputes, and implementing disciplinary measures. So these are what some scholars call super detainees in reference to how they are actually called in French-speaking Cameroon. So this literature has also highlighted the transactional interactions between the guards and the detainees, so a kind of negotiated order. And in some cases, noted that this authority is kind of delegated downwards from the administration to these prisoners' leaders, what scholar, so Martin and Jefferson called proxy governance. And importantly, some of this work has interpreted this arrangement as a sign of state weakness. So the idea that if the state has to rely on prisoners to run its own prison, it must be that something is broken in the system. So what has received actually less attention is the intelligence dimension of this arrangement. The fact that the detainees actually don't just manage, they also spy. And I want to argue that when you look at that dimension, what you see is not weakness, but it's a form of strategic state control. I'm not going to speak so much during my presentation on comparative research in Latin America and in Asia, but I keep this for the discussion thereafter, if it's okay with you. So maybe let me clarify the concept of low-tech intelligence. So low-tech intelligence, as I use it here, is drawing on David Bozzini's work on Eritrea. And it refers to surveillance that relies on human informants, so people who monitor conversation, track movements, compile information, and report it up the chain of command. So this stands in contrast to digital or technological surveillance, because the prison in Niger are actually essentially none of that. There is very limited CCTV in the prisons. I think the information I had from 2023, so that information I had on this regard, was that only 2 or 3 prisons in Niger actually have CCTV. But yet, so the administration knows what's happening inside because of the eyes and ears of the detainees themselves. So, a word on how this research has been conducted. So, my data was collected between 2019 and 2023. In total, I consulted over 300 people, mainly detainees themselves. Most of them were really detainees themselves in Niamey prison, the capital city. I also consulted former detainees, a member of the Niger National Guard, which is the force that is actually deployed in the prisons, institutional actor, and civil society representatives. My primary fieldwork was Niamey prison, where I had authorized repeated access to the detention wings themselves for several visits, more than a dozen. And all these visits were done during the day without guards being present. Through consulting work for NGOs and UN agencies, I also accessed other prison facilities, though I could not do ethnographic visits, ethnographic research there. But through these extra visits and also interviews with former detainees and GNN members of National Guard members, I gathered data from 35 prisons out of the 40 prisons that are currently operational in Niger. So I have quite a wide scope of data in this regard. I'm a lawyer, but the perspective that I'm having for this research is actually non-normative. The mechanism that I will present does not conform to written law, as it does not conform to written law in many other countries. But what I'm interested in this because it actually, to me, reflects an alternative legal order. My research is anchored in public administration, which means that I approach law also in the sociological sense. That is patterns, regularities, and recurring dynamics that structure the phenomena under study, even outside of the written law. So I will show you also some pictures that were taken from the prison of Niamey. They're about a bit old. They are from 20 years ago, but nowadays you're not allowed to take pictures anymore. But what you can see here is like the main courtyard, what you enter the Niamey prison. And in those prisons, so you have a person that is called Sarki Kasu, which means chief of the prison in Hausa language, which is the language that is a language that is spoken in Niger. So we call him in short Sarki, and so the Sarki is the head of the detainee hierarchy. Sarkis are actually present in every prison across the 8 regions of the country. And they are fundamentally Niger's National Guard's main informants inside the detention wings. So I asked the Niger National Guard's warden about the role of the Sarki in the prison. And the way they describe them is remarkably consistent. They say that they are the warden's eye and ear, that they collect intelligence on potential escapes, riots, and fights, that they report to the head of prison of any threat to order and discipline, that they are the principal intelligent agents within the prison walls. And it's important to note that the Sarki and his team, they do not contest this position, they really embrace this position. So one Sarki, for example, told me, my boys and I, we work for the warden. So this is quite clear to them. So the member of the Niger National Guard, they are physically present in the prison, but they are present at the perimeter of the prison, so in front of the doors, well, the gates, in the administrative office, but they are very rarely inside the detention wings themselves. They enter very rarely, so only for to do the head count every day together with the Sarki's team. I will talk about this in a minute. So concretely, it means that the people the state is supposed to be guarding are for most of the day out of the state agents' direct sight. So the National Guard, they don't go in. They have also very limited contact with ordinary detainees. So they need people on the inside. There are actually, in each prison, you can have several Sarki. You can have a Sarki in each detention area, meaning that there is a male Sarki for the male section, a woman Sarki for the female section, and also a child or an adult Sarki for the child section. The Sarki doesn't work alone. He or she leads a hierarchical team that covers every space in the prison. So every cell, every courtyard, every strategic location, like the kitchen, the infirmary, the rehabilitation workshop, the entrance gates, the visiting area. You have a member of the Sarki's team in all these places. What you can see here is actually a normal cell. It's one of the normal cells, for example, from this was taken again 20 years ago in Niamey prison. So those are collective cells, and nowadays you have about 200 people in such cells. And in each of these cells, you have one or two cell leaders. So the cell leaders are the basis of the pyramid. They sleep in the same room as the detainees they monitor. They are identifiable not by badges or armband or whatever, but it's because of you can identify them by the responsibility, like daily head counts, enforcement of cleanliness, the wider sleeping space, internal discipline, and also they have actually cut hoses that they can use as whip against ordinary prisoners. So the cell leaders, they report up to the courtyard chief, who are also detainees, and who report to the Sarki or to his or her deputy. And it is only the Sarki who actually reports directly to the prison administration. So what you can see is that the information flows upward through this structure, and nothing reaches the administration without passing through the Sarki, in theory. And I will come back to this a bit later. So what kind of information do they provide? There are mainly two types of information. The first is the most serious information concern direct threats to the security of the prison, for example, the preparation of an escape. And in such situation, they must be directly reported to the administration. The second type is that super detainees, so they report behavior that may simply disrupt internal order, including fights, which are very frequent in such collective cells, theft, conflict between prisoners, circulation of prohibited goods such as drugs, cigarettes, or mobile phones, or simply the refusal to comply with the authority of the prisoner hierarchy. So in such cases, the Sarki and his team would first attempt to manage the situations themselves, typically by punishing the person. And if this fails, meaning that if the person refuses the punishment, then the matter is escalated to the administration. So I do not have the time now to discuss the impact of the system on ordinary prisoners, particularly in terms of violence. But what matters, however, is that this reflects a real division of power and the role of the state administration in sustaining and protecting the Sarki's authority. So this is a very simplified version of what's going on in the prison, but you can see that the network is structured, is hierarchical, and is controlled by the administration. And what is very interesting is that the Sarki are nominated directly by the warden. So the administration, they have the power to nominate them, they have the power to revoke them, they have the power to suspend them if they step outside the limits of their role. And in many prisons, the warden also directly appoints the key members of the Sarki's team, meaning the courtyard chiefs and sometimes the room chiefs. So to me, this matters theoretically. This is really the point I would like to insist on. So scholarship on governance in the global south or in the peripheries argues several concepts, including prisoner self-governance, co-governance, hybrid governance. And so this concept really describes situation where the formal state authority and informal arrangement with the prisoners coexist and overlap. To me, this framing is very useful, but it doesn't go further enough in the context of Niger. In the prison of Niger, the Sarki's team is entirely subordinate to the formal authority. It's a direct chain of command with the authority at the administration at the top. And if you look at what the Sarki does, he or she works in effect as a non-formal bureaucratic agent. So this resonates, of course, with Massimo Soto's work on inmate governance in Latin America, particularly the emphasis on the complexity of power relations between staff and prisoners. But in the case of Niger, I consider it suggests a different configuration. So what we observe is closer to a direct and non-contested chain of command that is structured by the administration. So contestation actually, it does exist, but it's primarily carried out by ordinary prisoners and not by those integrated in the governance structure. That's something that to me is also very interesting, is that the ordinary prisoners, they challenge the system. In particular, they demand that the state official be the one who supervise them and run the prison, which is kind of interesting in terms of legitimacy, because the system actually help strengthen the legitimacy of the state because it delegates the dirty work to the inmates. Of course, the Sarkis and his or her team retain some autonomy, which is more or less wide depending on the prison at stake. You don't have the same autonomy, for example, in Niamey, in Agadez, or in Berrih. It really depends on the prison. But what is important to me is that the Sarki operates strictly within a perimeter that is set by the administration. So it's the administration that decides it all and that decides the degree of autonomy it wants to leave to the Sarki. And I believe this is one of the key points. And if the Sarki exceeds the power that is provided to him, then they just remove them from their position. Now, why would a detainee actually agree to spy on fellow prisoners? As in many other countries, super detainees enjoy significant privileges due to their role in the prison. So they control their own sleeping space, which in severely overcrowded prison is not trivial. You can see here, for instance, a picture of another cell, and you can see if you compare to the picture I showed you before, here you have mattresses, you have ventilators, electricity. It's still quite a lot of precarity, but it's very different from the condition of ordinary prisoners. Participating also in the Sarki's team allow them to avoid the most degrading course, like one of the core that you find is for example cleaning the latrines with bare hands. This is something that is compulsory when you enter the prison, so they don't have to do those courses. They also can receive extended family visits, and in some prison, like in other countries, Sarki are actually allowed to simply leave the facility temporarily to run errands in town or simply to go and see their families without the judge being informed. Of course, this is really that remains within the prison. Beyond that, the Sarki's team also benefits from the informal economy of the prison, so the rental of sleeping spots, the sale of cigarettes, the management of informal shops. that generate incomes, which can also not only benefit to them and to the other members of the team, but also to their family outside. So joining the system, in short, means significantly improving the condition of detention, but also keeping a sense of agency, which is a power, so to influence your own lives. But these privileges are not permanent. They are conditional, and the condition is the information that you can provide. So the degree of trust the administration places in a super detainees is directly proportional to his willingness to report. Those who provide information, they can enter the system, they can be part of the Sarki's team, and the more information you provide, the more you are promoted in the system. And those who promote less can be demoted. So I will quote one former detainee who explained to me, the system is a system of allegiance that is put in place. The administration does not want anyone to leave anyone any room to maneuver that would allow them to escape its control. One has to be a loyal servant. People are expected to report things about others. It's an organized system. Those who report less are not seen are knowing less, but they are seen as hiding things. They are not considered good servants. There is also a temporal asymmetry here. Most Sarki have been in prison for a very long time. They're often serving long sentences or have been awaiting trial for a long time. When I was in Niamey 2 years ago, the Sarki was actually still awaiting trial and they had been in prison for more than 10 years. So this is not something that is uncommon. And during this time, it provides the detainees with the institutional knowledge and the established relationship that make them actually valuable informants within the prison. But it also means that their position depends on continued cooperation. And this is where I think that this case really challenges the weak state interpretation. The administration does not only rely on the Sarki. The wardens deliberately build parallel networks of informants, shopkeepers, cooks, gardeners, former military men, or simply prisoners who have a personal connection to a guard. Many are recruited as additional eyes and ears. And it is really not just about getting information, it's about keeping the Sarki in check. As one warden told me, you always need to keep an eye on the detainee, otherwise he'll abuse his position. So the administration, they cultivate the Sarki's competitors, and they practice what one warden explicitly called counter-espionage. The result is that Sarkis know that they're being watched by informants that are hidden within their own team, but also by rivals they cannot identify. And this pushes them to constantly report everything preemptively to avoid being denounced themselves. So one former Sarki described it this way. You will have people who don't like the way you do things. They will try to sabotage you. Me, I report to the head guard because otherwise other people will go see him and say whatever they want. So the Sarki's power is real, but it's very fragile. And that fragility is really a feature that is orchestrated by the administration. The multiplication of parallel informants does also something else. It creates a pervasive atmosphere of distrust inside the prison. Detainees, so they don't know who is reporting on them, and rumor circulates about hidden agents within the prison cells. As one detainee put it, everyone is suspicious of everyone, from top to bottom. Another said the walls have ears, or another one, if you confide in someone, they can create problems for you. So this climate of suspicion plays an interesting function. I believe it really limits the solidarity between the detainees in the prison, and also by doing so prevents any kind of collective action against the prison administration. So what I've described in Niger's prison is not a state that has lost the control of its institution. Uh, to me, it's really a state that governs its prison through a sophisticated, low-tech intelligence system. Detainee participation in surveillance is not the symptom of a weak state. It's a technique of a functioning state. The administration delegates not because it cannot govern, but because delegation extends its reach into spaces where it's not directly physically present. And in this respect, the concept of discharge, developed by Max Weber and reworked by Benedict Ibu, is particularly useful. So this term discharge actually is about it explains that when you transfer some function to non-state actor, uh, you actually do not disappear, you remain present, and by doing so, the state actually prolongs and diffuses its domination. And I believe that in the case of the prison of Niger, this is a very interesting concept. Um, this form of control is not unique to Niger. Um, I have been conducted also a research for an NGO called FIACAT, and we've been doing so this work with two other colleagues across several Francophone African systems, and we find actually similar mechanisms. So there will be a presentation of this work next month in Abidjan for the NGO, and I think the report will be publicly available. Um, and some studies also on contemporary post-Soviet prisons also point to comparable dynamics in terms of intelligent practices. I really like the concept of polyopticon, meaning that everyone is actually watching everyone in the post-Soviet world, and also the concept of hyper-opticon, meaning that everyone watches everyone, not only in the prison. Not only the prisoners, but also the guards themselves are watched by each other, and it's also another form of control. But so what this suggests is that the low-tech prison intelligence, so instrumentalizing inmates to surveil inmates while keeping parallel informant networks. So to me, it's not a specificity of Niger. It's a method of governing from afar. That's how I call it. That is illegal, but actually quite effective. So I believe this case offers more than a contribution to the African prison studies, and that it can offer a comparative lens, maybe for rethinking the relationship between the state capacity and its exercise of power. Thank you so much for your attention. I don't know whether I'm okay with the timing, and that's it for me. I'll be happy to hear your thoughts, your questions, your comments. It's actually the first time that I present this work in an English-speaking world, so I'm very keen to hear your thoughts.